Welcome, everyone. Please, we're welcoming you to our webinar session today. My name is Madeline No. I'm with NetHope, and today we are hosting another ICT for D series webinar, and the topic today is ICT for safeguarding. And our speakers today come from several organizations: My Proteus, Plan International, and Save the Children. Before we get started today, I'd like to go over some housekeeping guidelines for today's session. We would like you to keep this an interactive session. Please open the Zoom chat window and add your questions and comments there for our Q&A session toward the end of the hour. And at the end of our session, we will follow up with a link to the recording for the session and any collateral on the NetHope Solutions Center. And also at the end of the session, we would very much appreciate if you would complete our webinar satisfaction poll to give us some feedback about how we're doing and how to improve these sessions. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator for today's session, Sonia Rutzel from Catholic Relief Services.
Thank you very much, Madeline, and thank you very much, NetHope, for facilitating this webinar series with us. Yes, as Madeline already said, today's webinar is talking about ICT for safeguarding. As in our ever-growing digital world, we're facing constantly new risks for exploitation, abuse, and harassment of people, and especially children. But those digital innovations are also offering new opportunities to improve the safeguarding efforts and practices. We have a very diverse speaker panel featuring experts from both safeguarding and ICT for D backgrounds. So today, their first-hand insight expertise are being shared by Bonnie Baker. She's the Managing Director of My Proteus. John Soldner, he is the Senior Advisor for Technology for Development and Innovation at Save the Children US. And Nora Lindström, she's the Global Lead for Digital Development at Plan International. Thank you very much for joining us. We're very much looking forward to your insights. So each of the speakers will be sharing or answering a question, and then there's opportunities for all attendees to post also questions, and we have time for a Q&A session. So our first speaker will be Bonnie. Bonnie will share some oversights on components of safeguarding and some lessons learned for a successful safeguarding operation model. So particularly, what do you need to do in your organization? So Bonnie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Madeline, can you go to the first slide for me, please? Thank you. So many of you know us as a change management company. We tend to get involved in all kinds of change, and safeguarding is one area that we have found that has been challenging for the whole sector. And in terms of implementing the change, we have found that it's been difficult for people to get their head around where to start on implementing best practice for safeguarding, and actually what is the size and the scope of it. A lot of the projects we get called in to do initially come from an IT slant, like a case management system or whistleblowing, or understanding what to do in related to training. And what we have found is that there's not always a comprehensive understanding of what are all the functions that you need to get right in order to improve your safeguarding capability. And this is an overview here that we were just sharing, just to put this into context of, there's quite a lot in here that you need to get right in order to be able to have a proper safeguarding capability. So in terms of the focus for a lot of the NGOs we've been seeing, a lot comes in the incident reporting, you know, the ability for people to make a complaint and get that through to your NGO or to a partner. And then a lot of it goes into the trying to support the survivor in processing the complaint. But what we found is that, it does cut across all functions of organizations between IT, programs, HR, M&E. And in order for it to work successfully, it's taking a look first at these are all the components that you have for safeguarding, understanding that IT in isolation is not going to be able to solve some of the risks around safeguarding, that the ownership needs to happen across the organization, and being clear about the fact that once you get started and working on implementing best practice for safeguarding, this is a journey you're just starting and you'll need to refine it over time. Can you go to the next slide? Sorry, my voice is, I've got a bit of a cold here. So common areas where we find technology is coming in is whistleblowing, case management, the obvious link with where it's related to an employee, your HRIS system, online learning, the need to have an improved referral system amongst NGOs with each other, and quite significantly also reporting. These areas I have here in yellow are the key areas that have been coming up a lot in terms of a request for systems. But really importantly, all of the functions need to be clear if you're going to then put a system in place. So for example, if you're going to put in a case management system, it needs to be clear about simple things about what constitutes a case, having your definitions aligned, being clear about what your policies are and what the processes are internally in the handoff of a case being identified to the processing of the case and the follow-up. We also see that there's a lot of focus on the survivor support, but when you have a case come through, you have a lot of issues in terms of how you make sure all the streams are properly followed. So it's the survivor, but also the perpetrator and the complainant. And so the challenge with any solution you're putting in from an IT perspective is really understanding how all of these components will need to come together into processes and agreed by each of the business units involved before you can actually put them into a system. Can you go to the next slide, Madeline? Thank you. So in terms of, if you are in an organization and you need to engage, build technology or play some role in that, these are just our top 5 tips in terms of what you need to be aware of before starting. The most important thing, the first one, is making sure everybody understands what the full model of safeguarding actually is. What are all the components of it? What elements can technology help you with, but also realistically areas that technology can't cover. And a big part of that is also about the cultural change piece. The second big thing is about, you may have policies in your organization and they may need some work, but one of the big challenges is making sure that they can be translated properly into processes and how you're going to implement the change. And as many of you know, you can't easily build a technology without both of these being in place. And this can take a lot of time to actually sort out. The third thing is about ownership. Ownership is quite a difficult one in safeguarding because, as many of you would know, not every organization has dedicated safeguarding people. There are many people that play a role in supporting processes around safeguarding. And this is one of the main reasons where we see things actually going wrong. This is one that has to get clarity early on, because when you're in the middle of trying to implement, getting alignment and ownership is absolutely critical in order to implement. And we've seen several projects stagnating when that can't be resolved. The next one is about understanding what happens to the data and what happens in the full cycle of a case. So if people are engaged in whistleblowing, but they don't understand what happens once the case is going through the process, there's issues about not capturing the right data, enough data, and also the security around the data, which is quite critical. And the last one, building this capability is an ongoing process. It's a maturity model for many organizations. Nobody's doing it perfectly. Everybody's constantly revising and reviewing and seeing how they can improve. And I think that's just an important thing to understand in any of the technology that people are picking, because the technology is going to need to change as your organization will need to change and improve over time. So that's just a high-level overview. We've got lessons learned in a lot more detail that we can share with NetHope, and that could be sent out separate from the conversation today. Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. And our next speaker will be John Saltner. John, my question for you is, how does Save the Children create a culture and good guidance for safeguarding to protect program partners, especially children, when you use digital tools as part of your programming? And also, can you please give us examples of some sort of projects that Save the Children implements to protect children from online abuse? Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Sonia. First, I just want to take a step back to talk about the scope of the problem. It's really with the advent of widespread access to the internet, it's allowed us to do a lot of great things, including provide training and educational experiences to kids that we've never been able to in the past. But at the same time, just like technology allows us to educate more effectively or provide information more effectively, it also allows the bad guys to more effectively access children. So just a couple of quick stats. Last year, tech companies reported over 45 million online photos and videos of children being sexually abused. And this is growing exponentially. The number of photos reported between 2014 and 2017 grew 1,000%, and it's still growing steeply. In their global threat assessment, this last one that We Protect Global Alliance published, they show that 750,000 almost all men at any point in time are looking to connect with children around the world for sexual purposes. So it's a huge and growing problem, and it's a problem in the communities we work in the global South, not just in the North. It started where technology first became available, but in the global South communities we work in, they've come online much more quickly and have less of an infrastructure and less knowledge about what sounds right and what doesn't. So it's much more easy for kids who recently come online in a culture where there's not a lot of knowledge about these tools to be tricked into or coerced into doing things they regret in the future. It's also very gendered, like really all sexual abuse and harassment. It's highly skewed towards girls. About 65% of child sexual abuse materials or child porn depict girls, although 30% are of boys. So we also have to pay attention to how we're going to help boys who are facing online violence. So I guess the first thing I'd say about our safeguarding policies or principles is that I think online safeguarding or safeguarding when using technology tools isn't really different from safeguarding in general. It should flow from our safeguarding policies. It's not the type of work is very similar, even if some of the tools being used are different and need some special attention. And generally, our principles on safeguarding are: all children have equal rights to protection from harm. Everybody has a responsibility to support the protection of children. And organizations like ours have a duty of care to children who we work with or come into contact with in any way. And we also have a responsibility to make sure that any volunteers or partners who are working with us are also up to that high degree of safeguarding, and that everything we do in child safeguarding should be put in the lens of keeping children safe. Anyone in a Save the Children project who either is a staff person, a volunteer, or anybody else who in any way has contact with a child receives a background check. That includes people who may just come in contact through some kind of virtual volunteering. And they all receive training also. So all staff members receive mandatory training before they start work, and then there's annual training to top that up. And the whole principle is to minimize the risk to children while at the same time creating very strong mechanisms so that everybody knows what to do if we see something in the field or hear of something anywhere where we think a child is at harm who's in our care. So with projects that use technology tools and bring children online, there are some special considerations, and I'll use a project I worked on last year called Click Chat Read, where we brought in corporate volunteers and some Save the Children volunteers to read with children in the rural US via video links. So we had these Elmo document cameras, projectors that would, you would stick a book underneath the projector so that, and the book was in the child's hands, so the child could be reading with the physical book and the volunteer could see the book over the video link. And the idea was that the children could get more practice reading, and that the volunteer, just like a volunteer who would sit next to the child at a desk, would help them through the reading and give them positive reinforcement. But of course, we have to design that in a way that was safe for children. There was no physical contact, but we had to do things like provide special training to those volunteers to make sure they don't even inadvertently solicit information from the children about what it is that, where they are. We didn't even want them to know what schools they're in, or what cities they're in. And then we had to, one of the issues was of course, with a video conference, you need very strong audio and video. I had originally planned to have the children use earphones so that we could maximize their hearing. And we decided in consultation with our child safeguarding team that we wouldn't do that, just on the off chance that an adult was saying something that we should hear, again, even if it's inadvertent, so that we could address it. So we had monitors in the room with the children and didn't allow them to use those headphones. So we can track that. And then just giving some examples, as you asked, on our child protection programs around the world. We've been involved in this business for over 20 years now. So especially starting with our Nordic members, where when common use of the internet by youth and children was first becoming a thing, we recognized that there's a risk to children, and so started creating, getting involved in the communities for reporting any harm against children. So we work with an organization called NetHope that runs child hotlines for reporting child sexual abuse materials or child abuse in any form online against children. We do that in several countries now, and we're also have a number of different types of interventions in a number of countries around the world. One is in Sri Lanka, where we're working with the government on a national action plan to address online sexual exploitation of children. I'm calling from Bangkok, where I'm in a International Telecommunications Union ASEAN regional consultation about looking at both what's happening to kids in Asia regarding online abuse, and what governments and international agencies can do to help start that, and INGOs like Save the Children and Plan. And it's pretty shocking, and like I say, it's a big challenge. So one of the things we're doing in Sri Lanka is bringing together a multi-stakeholder group so that we have private industry and government and academics and INGOs in the room, but also consulting children and their parents, because they often get overlooked. So we're doing research, of course, but we're also working to strengthen the cyber crime unit in the country. We're developing standard operating procedures for what should happen when a case comes up. We're using the We Protect model response mechanism, which is a model for how child protection systems should be set up across a country. And we're doing a lot of training for both parents, students, teachers, and for social workers that come into a lot of contact with children. And another example is in the Northwest Balkans, in a program we called Connected and Safe, where we're reaching almost 70,000 children and 25,000 parents. We're working on, like in all of these projects, if you want to do them at scale, you have to work on the individual level and the society level and the judicial level. So we're working to do the training for children and parents, but doing that in consultation with children, because a lot of times organizations create the messages that they know children need to hear, or they think children need to hear in order to be safe on the internet, but the messages are delivered in a way that don't resonate with the youth at all. So they don't, you tell them the message, but it's not absorbed and it doesn't change behavior. On the society level, we're working with private industry and government to do mass media campaigns. And then we're also working in community groups to be able to train community members for signs of abuse, and also so that they can themselves model safe use of the internet to children. And then finally, on the systems level, a lot of the countries we work in have very poor legal systems for addressing child protection in general. You know, if you think about India, we can't keep girls safe from sexual violence in India in general. Doing it online is one bar much harder. So it's critical that we work with judicial systems and policymakers so that the adequate laws get passed that specifically make the actions we're seeing online illegal, and then with the law enforcement systems so that they actually get prosecuted. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much, John. And this is also a reminder to all our attendees, if you have any questions for any of the speakers specifically or in general for the panel or around this topic, please place those in the chat room, as we will have some time for Q&A. But before we move to Q&A, it's my pleasure to also ask Nora Lindström to share her latest research on how leveraging digital platforms, especially Facebook, as a means to build safe networks and interact with youth in their work. So Nora, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Sonia. So at Plan, we're increasingly using and interested in using online platforms, and by that I mean sort of social media networking sites, essentially, to both connect with youth and children, as well as enable connections among children and young people. And these type of platforms are great because they're fast, they're convenient, relatively low cost, as well as scalable, and they allow us to quickly reach and interact with potentially quite large groups of children and young people in multiple formats, so sort of video, images, quizzes, you name it, including in areas where we're not physically present. We can also use them to amplify young people's voices and gain new insights on issues that are important to young people. So they make sense. It makes sense to us to use them. And we also know that many of these online platforms are already integral parts of the lives of many children and young people across the world. And this is something that can be leveraged. So while, of course, digital divides exist, user numbers from most of these most popular platforms, they keep growing as internet access becomes more available. We also know that young people want to be online, and they can be very creative in finding means to do so. And significantly, us using online platforms in our work leverages technology that many young people already have, which in a way makes them make the most out of the investment they might have made into, say, a smartphone. So, but at the same time, we're of course very aware of the fact that the digital world is a vast and largely unregulated space, and that there are many risks online for children and young people, as John has also spoken about. So we need to make all reasonable efforts to manage those risks while making the best use of the benefits that these platforms provide for our work. So recently we've been looking at how we can use these online platforms for private engagement. And what I mean by that is, so use them in a way that where the content isn't visible to the public or third parties, as might be the case in like public campaigning or communications, but more in sort of private groups. Because once you go public and third parties can see, or the public can see what's discussed, then there are significantly more risks, including things like gender-based violence online. So we've been developing this internal guidance, and a key question that we've been discussing is sort of the extent of our duty of care when it comes to digital safeguarding. And what we've landed on is that it's unrealistic to believe that we can manage all types of safety and protection risks when children and young people use the internet. And so while we can and should build children's online resilience and educate them on online protection and safety measures in general, it's important to remember that we can only manage the safeguarding risks within the scope of the online spaces that we set up. So, for example, if accessing a private online space requires entry through a public platform, like it is on Facebook, right? You have to go into Facebook in order to access a private group. We can't be held accountable for all the content participants might encounter, in the process of getting to that private group, just in the same way as we can't be held accountable for something a young person who's coming to a workshop might see through the window of the bus that they're taking to the workshop. So there is a limit to the duty of care. But that said, of course, we have to weigh the benefits of the proposed use of Facebook or a similar platform against the risks associated with the lack of private access. Also, limiting our duty of care in this way does, of course, not take away from the broader need for us to advocate and work for safer, more empowering online spaces and an end to gender-based violence online and sexual exploitation of children and so on. So in terms of the risks associated with using online platforms in our work, we kind of broadly put them in 3 or 4 categories. So we can look at content risks, so exposure to sort of extreme, inappropriate or harmful content. We look at contact risks, so users sharing information about themselves, which puts them at risk or to be contactable by others. Their conduct risks, so related to sort of harassment, cyberbullying, intimidation, threats, etc. And then we have a bit of a sort of catch-all general category where things like users not knowing how to report concerns on a platform might fall, but also, for example, young people getting into risky situations in order to go online and to access these platforms. So, for example, going to use the internet in an internet cafe, which may or may not be safe. Now, in terms of what to do and how to do digital safeguarding, I thought I'd talk you through a current project that we have. It's called Girls Out Loud, and it provides safe, private online spaces for girls to discuss key gender issues. And for that, we use private Facebook and Instagram groups that are moderated by planned staff, where girls are asking questions and discussing topics such as self-image, gender-based violence, early pregnancies, prevention, abortion, and so on. To date, the project's been implemented in Colombia, Guatemala, the Dominican Republic, Senegal, and the UK. And as part of the project, we also have a social listening dashboard, which we created in collaboration with IBM and Accenture. And this dashboard analyzes the discussions the girls are having in the groups using artificial intelligence. And we're then able to pull that data and pull those insights from the data to use in our research, in our program design, as well as our proposal writing. So Girls Out Loud kind of allows us to know what girls are thinking and feeling right now in real time. But it's also a channel where we can inform girls of their rights to help them stay safe as well as to help to encourage them to take action in their communities. So why use Facebook? Well, while we recognize that there are risks associated with using Facebook, at the same time, Facebook is where the girls are. And if they're going to spend the little time and money they have to go online, then our research showed that they would go to Facebook. Now, of course, this can change over time and it can be different in different contexts. So, for example, in Girls Out Loud in the UK, we're testing use of Instagram. But overall, like, the key to this project was to meet girls where they are. This was considered absolutely central for success. So we decided to go with that and to make that engagement on Facebook as safe as possible. So I wanted to share 8 sort of key learnings on digital safeguarding from the project's team. Number 1, know your platform. So really understanding how the platform works for minimizing risks as well as leveraging functions that the platform may have to make its use safer. So for example, Girls Out Loud uses Facebook's group rules function to outline the code of conduct, and they've posted infographics, key infographics as units, which is an option that allows for posts to be permanent. Number 2, keeping an online space safe is a full-time job. So it's an incredibly time-consuming task. And we have a dedicated person for this, a full-time moderator who encourages discussion, answers questions on Messenger, and ensures that the group is safe. We've also involved technical advisors and safeguarding focal points from the start, and this is absolutely central. Number 3, take care when accepting new members. So the Girls Out Loud groups on Facebook are set as private. The moderator is the only profile that has admin rights in the group and the only one who can accept new members. And before accepting new members, the moderator has to do extensive vetting of the profiles. So they can look at if the girl already has friends in the group, if they look like an average teenage girl in the picture. And if there's any doubt, then the moderator will contact the person directly through Messenger to ask more in-depth questions. A top tip from the project team is to use group names that don't pop up in searches that often, because this helps avoid unwanted solicitations. So they've sort of used made up words and names in local languages and odd abbreviations for the groups so that they're not as discoverable if you're not aware of them. Number 4, reiterate the importance of staying safe online. So the group members spend a lot of time on Facebook, and it's key to try to make them use Facebook and the group safely, so both. So there's a lot of talk about setting profiles to private, how to block users, how to report upsetting content. And it's also been very important to reiterate that you need to keep your password safe, because there's been some cases where girls have shared passwords with their boyfriends as a sign of trust in the relationship. Number 5, be prepared to deal with polarized discussions. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of sensitive topics such as abortion that are being discussed in these groups, and opinions may vary widely. So the moderator has a really important role here to make sure that everyone respects each other's opinions and sort of follows the code of conduct, and that any disrespectful comments and upsetting content won't be tolerated. Number 6, so as you build trust, group members will start reaching out for help. So in these groups, while the big discussions are held on the group wall, there's also important interactions between the moderators and the girls happening on Messenger. So as there's more trust built in these groups, the girls are starting to ask more sensitive questions on Messenger directly to the moderator that they wouldn't potentially want to ask publicly in the group. And some have also reported some serious issues like abuse or being forced into a marriage on Messenger. And this allows us to then immediately transfer these cases to the relevant office's protection and safeguarding focal point. Number 7, offline interaction helps build trust. So for success, it's been important to establish this trust between the moderators and the girls in these groups, so that the girls really feel that these are safe spaces where they can discuss anything. And to enable that, we have a face-to-face meeting once a year for each of the groups, where the girls can meet the person behind the computer, so the moderator, as well as meeting some of the other girls. And this really helps sort of build the community. And then finally, 8, be transparent about how personal data is used. So as I mentioned, we are sort of getting insights from the discussions happening in these groups. And it's been very important that we are as transparent as possible about this, about who has access to the group's conversations and the member data, so that, you know, before they join or when they join, girls can decide actually if they want to be part of it or not. Also here, Facebook's own terms and conditions are way too complicated. So we've developed some simple sort of Q&A infographics to help the participants really understand understand how it all works. So that's how we've started using Facebook, and it's been really successful so far. Really helped us with getting new insights on what really affects girls and how girls think. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Nora. Yeah, thank you to all the speakers for your insights. We have received some questions from the attendees, so I would like to now open the Q&A session, and it's still an opportunity for everybody to ask new questions. If we don't get around to answering all of them, we will do that afterwards in a Q&A document. While we, Nora, actually, I have a question directly addressed to you, talking about platforms. So maybe we can start there, and then we also have some questions specifically around data protection for everybody. So the question is, whilst it is not the responsibility of platform designers for targeted young girls and boys being badly influenced by contributions by others in platforms, how would you make them to consent? And should young girls and boys be attacked for what they share online? How best can they be protected against such attacks or harm? I know, Nora, you already touched upon that. Can you maybe add some more content and answer those questions?
So I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding the questions, but I mean, certainly platform designers do need to take some responsibility here. I think one of the problems that we, for example, have so much gender-based violence online is because there's been such a lack of diversity among the creators of these platforms, and these platforms have not been created with all these different use cases in mind. And so I do actually think that the platform designers and owners and those profiting from many of these platforms do need to think more about the users and keeping users safe. So, for example, if we talk more broadly about Facebook, yes, there's a reporting function, but last time I checked, and this is maybe 6 months ago, so this may have changed since, but it doesn't actually allow you to report gender-based violence. Now, we know that a significant number of girls and women around the world are experiencing gender-based violence on social media sites, right? But you can report you can sort of report general harassment and abuse, but you can't report it being gender-based. And this keeps us actually from having proper statistics on gender-based violence on Facebook specifically. So I do think that there is a responsibility in designing these platforms better and to make sure that they are safe for everyone.
You know, I would add, I agree with using Facebook platform in our projects, not for every project, but the problem we face is that in many of the countries we work in, children are almost only accessing Facebook via mobile, and they're not really accessing the internet in many other ways, besides maybe doing searches. So Facebook is most of their experience of the internet. So if we block it off and don't allow them to use it in our programs, then there's no way of us kind of teaching them about how it works and what to do and what not to do. So we know they're going to use it, that they are using it. So we have to more model how it can be used responsibly and safely.
Thank you, John. Nora, we also had a specific question for you about how you select the moderators. Do they have any specific qualifications? And also, oh yeah, sorry, that's the next question. Maybe we just stick to that one first. How do you select your moderators for the project?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question, and unfortunately, I'm not close enough to the project to have the exact details. But I do know that the team has gone through extensive recruitment and efforts to find the right type of moderator with background both in sort of how to engage with youth, as well as how to do it safely online. Having said that, as I mentioned, of course, there have been sort of technical advisors and protection and safeguarding focal points engaged throughout, so that it's not that the moderator needs to have all the information, but there's actually a team behind them that they can go to if they need further support, or indeed if there is a case of abuse that needs to be referred onwards.
Thank you. We had also a number of questions around data protection. So maybe, given sort of the time left, let's have a go at those. One question is sort of, I guess, more in general about data protection, but also specifically mention the GDPR. So, Bonnie, you noted that there's a need to have a clear internal policies in place, and those policies need to be enforced through technology tools that the entire organization needs to understand holistically. The tools themselves can present issues of data collection, privacy, security, etc., that are not straightforward. So while this is not a new challenge, what is the real or unvarnished bottom line for nonprofits or tech firms in this environment? Bonnie, can I ask you to maybe start off with talking about the data protection and what are the expectations for NGOs and tech firms? And then I would also like to ask John and Nora to chip in.
Sure, I'm happy to. So, well, as you all know, GDPR applies in some areas, but there, as Brian mentions in his note, governments have their own policies as well, and they do change. That's why for international NGOs, this is hard, where I was mentioning the need to be on top of the processes is really important. And the tools themselves that he's referring to, that I also discussed earlier, there are many different tools that you are going to be using to cover your safeguarding needs. So, so this is coming across your HR system, whistleblowing systems, even your whole procurement and recruitment processes, and all of the organizations on the line. Most likely you're finding that you have several different technologies you're going to use. So the challenge for NGOs I see is that that model that I was sharing earlier, I think it's important that the model is understood, by the NGO. And that model then needs to be overlaid with a technical architecture for your NGO, and taking a look at all the technologies that you're planning to use before you are purchasing a technology, understanding the responsibility that the tech firm is taking in terms of the security of the data, and also understanding some of these systems are going to need to speak to each other with the flow of the data. And so that's where that model needs to be overlaid with one where you really try and understand as an organization where the flow of the data is going to go and who's able to actually access it. And I've seen a couple of NGOs where that's a really big problem for them, where they still can't, agree on who has the ability to see data on cases. It's something that internally they need to sort out. But I think that, in terms of the sector, there's no one tech firm that I've seen that will actually be able to give you an answer to it. I think it's a collection, likely, and this is, why I think NetHope is an ideal center for this, is, these tech firms coming together that everybody is purchasing the different technologies from, to have these types of discussion, because security, I think, is one of the biggest issues, and I haven't seen anybody solve it, in a way that somebody could just copy, because everybody has a different environment of things that they've picked. I think that answers does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you, Bonnie. And may I also ask John, particularly, how does Save the Children protect the data of the program partners? Do you have anything else you can add?
Sure. First of all, I think one important thing is to only collect the data that's necessary for our program implementations and evaluations, because there's a tendency, I think, in this sector to, if you get out there, you have your tablet in hand and you want to suck up as much data as possible about the beneficiaries you're working with and their communities. And a lot of that data at the end of the day doesn't get used. And some of it, even if it's used, it doesn't add a lot of value. So I think we can slim down our data collection from the front end. But then we have an enterprise level of data protection, which is we went through and did a large data audit across the whole organization last year to look at any vulnerabilities that we had and to patch them. So for data that's been being collected on beneficiaries and partners and stored in systems or servers that we control. But then it's a lot of it also is training the people who are collecting that data and who are setting up systems using existing platforms like Kobo, Toolbox, or ComCare, ODK. All those platforms can be secure, but they need to be set up correctly. So we have to provide the right training. One of the things I'm doing is putting together a virtual group of technology for development staff across all of Save the Children, and identifying the people who are the experts in DHIS2, ComCare, and those applications where we hold a lot of data, so they can both we can have them be the ones to build out the systems, but also so they can give peer advice when someone who's not as familiar with the software is setting it up.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. Nora, my next question is for you from one of our participants. When engaging with girls, what is important when you're communicating your data protection policies to ensure they fully understand it, and also obviously being transparent as well?
Well, as with communicating anything to specific target groups, the content needs to be sort of adapted, and you need to think about who you're speaking to. I'm currently supporting a project that we have in Liberia, where we are working with girl-led organizations to do peer-to-peer research. So we're building the capacity of activists to actually go and use digital data collection tools to collect data on issues relevant to them, but from other youth. And in this, for example, what we did is we did a very sort of a clear data life cycle. So really kind of drew out all the different, like where does the data come from? Where does it go? How is it dealt with? Who is using it? When is it disposed of? And what gets disposed of? So raw data versus, the analysis and so on. So really kind of like spelling that out, and the visual was very useful here. In the Girls Out Loud project, they have these sort of like infographics on the site which talk about how the data gets used. So I think it just needs to be simplified, and it needs to be made suitable for the target audience.
Thank you very much, Nora. We have time for one more question, and then unfortunately we're already towards the end of our webinar. My last question is for Bonnie, and it's about what sorts of steps and protocols do you see critical to ensure that staff do not interact with youth outside the confines of their specific roles? So John shared earlier great examples of limiting volunteers' knowledge about where the schools are. And our participant is curious to hear from you, Bonnie, if in terms of how policies and procedures could capture guidance for staff.
Yeah. So on that one, I think there's multiple things on that. First of all, I think one thing that's really important for organizations to put in place is an agreement that safeguarding as an issue is a cultural change program. So where I see organizations having some challenges with it is when the full responsibility is sitting with HR to try and take ownership of it, or just within programs. But the best that I've seen in terms of how to embed this is having many different avenues to try and get it across. So there's definitely a whole communication piece that needs to happen. The training that I've seen set up, a lot of it has been on induction. I'm seeing more NGOs understanding the need to embed training into the programs more, which the other speakers today have been speaking about. But quite simply, the biggest challenge is that everybody is busy and not everybody has time to attend courses or to go online to learning management systems and take a look. And this is where I think from a technology perspective, this is where taking the policies and bringing them alive and putting the processes into a system has been the most effective way to address it. So case management systems where they're being used effectively, it takes the mystery out for the staff understanding what they need to do, where they need to go, because the processes are in the system. The responsibilities have been embedded into the system, and so they will naturally go the course of what has actually been defined and agreed and set up. And it reduces the inconsistency you have from location to location if you have a global system that you put in place. And that is one big element that helps, but the constant communication from the organization in as many different places as possible to reiterate the messages and explaining what they need to do is really important, and that it needs to happen frequently.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and thank you very much, John and Nora, for your insights and sharing those. Again, we will make the recording available afterwards, as well as a summary. So thank you, everybody, for attending. I also wanted to briefly mention that our ICT4D conference, which will take place on the 21st till 23rd of April in Abuja, Nigeria, will have a lot of sessions talking about digital literacy and safeguarding, and you will hear obviously from our partners, Plan International and Save the Children. So do have a look at the website, and we will also make some information on that available afterwards. So thank you very much, and we will meet again for the next ICT4D webinar on March 17th, when we'll talk about digital ID. Thank you to Madeleine and NetHope for facilitating us. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for attending today's session.
See you in Nigeria.
Please take a moment to complete our webinar satisfaction poll. You'll find the link to that in the chat window, and it will pop up after you close the webinar. And don't forget to look for that follow-up email that you'll receive later today with a recording link and other collateral. And please have a great rest of your day. Thank you.